Opinion on Sky News Australia starts now. Live, this is Outsiders.
Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to woke political correctness on steroids. What Aussie Sheila expat pop star Holly Valance is to woke political correctness on steroids.
Australia I grew up in was unreal. It was so fun, and we didn't seem to have all these problems. There wasn't all this sort of like the woke stuff's really gone big in Australia.
You got that right. The Australia we grew up in was a fantastic place. What a shame today's kids are, well, here's Holly again.
Like, I don't understand why you had this like demonic little gremlin high priestess of climatism as the goddess in classrooms, Greta
Thunberg, okay.
And the kids are all coming home with depression and anxiety. Why would you go to your music lesson or bother doing your homework or get out of bed if you think we're all going to be dead in 5 years anyway? I mean, they told me in class. Greta told me. Why would you bother? Doesn't give anybody hope.
Great question, Holly, but, I'm not really sure you've quite told us what you really think. Oh, you will tell us what you think? Okay.
A lot of my best friends are male, and I don't think they all need to put on a dress these days to be interesting.
It's still in Australia. Should it ditch the monarchy?
Should Australia? No way.
No way. King Charles I.
Part of us.
Fantastic. That's Holly Valance, pop star from the noughties, who's not afraid to call out the weird world of woke for what it is. Holly, you can come on the show anytime you like. How refreshing. And later in the show, we'll be talking to another iconic Australian pop star, singer-songwriter Deborah Conway. But first, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. So, James, elections in Queensland, that premier up there, the grinning man, Mr. Stephen Miles, not looking quite so good, James.
Yeah, well, I think old Giggles is going to wake up with a bit of a frown this morning, Rowan and Rita, because it does look like the LNP has really had a massive swing to them in Queensland. This is off the back of so many failures of that Queensland government. By-elections in Ipswich West, it looks like they're going to lose that. They're going to hold on to Inala, which is Anastasia Palaszczuk's seat. But what this suggests is that come the state election, Labor is absolutely toast, and this will break that Labor stranglehold on mainland Australia in terms of the state and territory governments.
Well, let's hope it follows through, Rita, to the federal election. We would like to see that happen as well.
We were here not that long ago. Every time this happens, the political class pretend like we've gone through some enormous shift in the country and conservatism is dead. This happened back in 2007, 2008, where every single state government, including Tasmania, it wasn't just mainland, was Labor. Kevin Rudd was around, remember those days? And we
can't forget them.
Remember how that all turned out? It didn't turn out too well for the left. So this could be the wave going back.
And it is interesting, too, because I think it is the one thing I'll say about the Queensland election is that really it is, these real core issues that have absolutely smashed Labor. And this is where they've been shown to be out of touch. I think probably the number one issue there would have to be youth crime. Everybody I speak to in Queensland, from Townsville all the way down to the Gold Coast, says this is a huge concern. And you've got old Giggles up there who's, laughing away about this sort of stuff. They're putting through laws which are too little, too late, but you can tell that they just don't take it seriously. And there's a great lesson there for Peter Dutton and the federal coalition that you go for these heartland issues that really affect people: crime, cost of living, the borders, which we're going to talk about a little bit later,
energy
is
policy.
going to be huge. Energy. These are the things people care about, and these are the things where culturally in their DNA, Labor is actually really very divorced from the people of Australia.
Divorced from reality, as it were. UNRWA, we've spoken about UNRWA. This is the United Nations Relief Works Agency. Well, To their eternal shame, Labor showing that they are unfit, in my opinion, to be the government of this country. They've returned your money, your taxpayer dollars, to UNRWA, which is the controversial organisation which we've shown here many times over many years. The suspicion of the links to Hamas, the individuals who were with Hamas, who are also with UNRWA, etc., etc., etc. We've gone through all of that. Penny Wong this week decided, I'm going to give back the $6 million to UNRWA. Julie Bishop cancelled money to them. Where's the DFAT advice on that? We had the Teals last week, to their eternal shame. Here's their letter. The hands that signed the paper. There you go. That's the Teals urging the refunding of UNRWA.
Labor's listening to them, Rowan. I mean, you can't blame the Teals.
Labor in bed with the Teals.
Yeah,
there you
Labor's
go.
not just listening to the Teals. Labor is listening to the large Muslim populations in some of their seats in Western Sydney, suburban Melbourne, that are really driving this. And the shift between, an older generation of ALP members and politicians who are very supportive of Israel and this new younger generation that is entirely beholden to green ideology. But just on the UNRWA funding, when Scott Morrison cut that in half, there had been advice. They knew that there were links and issues.
It was Julie Bishop. It was under Turnbull.
And UNRWA and Hamas, that there were concerns around this. And so there were, and you look at the allegations that have gone out about many people who are involved with UNRWA also having ties to Hamas. You look at what various UN Watch organizations have looked at, some of these groups that are watchdogs and some of the things they've alleged about UNRWA. It's very disturbing that we would be giving them money without having these allegations fully tested.
Well, and never mind October 7, it goes deeper than that.
Much
We've been
further.
talking about this on this program for years. I know, Ron, you've been writing about it, the concerns about how that money is being used to push hate, indoctrination in schools, all sorts of programs that seem to reward behaviour that we want to stamp out, not encourage. So this is deeper than obviously the atrocities of October 7, but you would think that would wait around until that report and that investigation was completed before they would restore funding.
Absolutely. Well, I'll be talking about it later on in my editorial about that very issue. The Teals and the Greens as well have been out spending your money.
Hello.
Seriously, the Teals deserve to be slammed at the next federal election. Get rid of them, folks. Go back to the Liberals. They pretended to be Liberals. They were all phonies. They were all frauds. They were all fakes. They're green through and through. Their ideology is green through and through. They proved that last week with their call to refund UNRWA. Their spending is out of control. We've seen printing bills, thousands and thousands of dollars, and these bills.
The digital age.
Yeah, exactly.
People who think we're about to all blow up because of global warming are printing things.
Oh, yeah, chopping down trees.
How very
to print
1970s
things.
of them.
Thousands of dollars. Kylie Tink in North Sydney there, $87,000 on printing and communications. James, these people get into power and they just go crazy. Forget all... they are the ones who preach concern for the environment, yet do they live up to it? Of course not. They are hypocrites and they are frauds, and we've got to get rid of them.
Well, of course they are. I mean, the Teals and the Greens are particularly bad. I mean, let's just go and say that basically the entire political class is guilty of using your money to go and do all sorts of ridiculous things. I mean, this week in the Daily Telegraph, we had reports that people like Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones, who was using a car to go back and forth to Canberra when he apparently had a car that was provided for him by the taxpayer that he could have driven. So, you see all sorts of questions around this sort of thing.
You can't have too many cars, James, not when the taxpayer is picking up the bill.
That's right.
But can we talk about Adam Band for a second?
Yes,
because
please
he is
do.
the Greens leader. He is amongst the biggest global warming alarmists, climate change catastrophists in the country. And yet, you look at his spending, almost $1 million he's spent in a single year. 200,000, I think it was the cost of the printing. But we're talking about a couple of private plane trips. And one of those was between Canberra and Brisbane. Now, last I checked, Virgin, Qantas, Jetstar, they'll fly between Canberra and Brisbane. Why do we need a private jet What I didn't see there were expenses, I don't know, for Myki cards for public transport, because that's how the Greens should be getting
Well, that's
around.
how the Greens
Absolutely.
want
But
you
to get around.
You to- and
One
Rita,
rule
this
for
is the
them.
point.
But this is
the point, because this is the thing. The Greens are watermelons. They're green on the outside. They are red on the inside. And this whole thing where Adam Bandt and the nomenclatura, to borrow an old Soviet-era phrase, go flying around in private jets and private cars while wanting you to go and take public transportation and ride a bike. This is exactly like, every Marxist sort of situation where the leaders and the bosses get the palaces and the villas and the dachas, and you wind up, essentially, living in the pod and eating the bugs.
Some animals are more equal than others, as we have learned. And as I wrote in the Herald Sun during the week, never stand between a socialist and a big fat pile of other people's money, because they will have their hand out. And Adam Bandt, almost $1 million, well over 900,000 in a single year. To me, it's just not. Sure, it could be within his entitlements, and that was the claim from the Greens. But then Bronwyn Bishop's $5,000 helicopter ride was within entitlements.
And was used to bring down Abbott. I mean, it's disgraceful. Yeah. Just quickly back on the Anwar thing, I just want to play you a clip of Simon Birmingham, the Liberal Senate leader, putting forward what the coalition does not support the refunding of Anwar. So let's have a listen.
The coalition does not support the decision of the Albanese government to reinstate funding at this time. Ahead of the conclusion of the review, no Australian dollar should ever be made available to any organisation or people who may use it to support, incite or undertake terrorist acts.
So there you go, crystal clear. So the Teals who pretend to be Liberals or Conservatives are frauds and phonies. Here's the letter, they all signed it, every Teal, Spender, the lot of them, Monique Ryan, all of them signed that letter. So here's a tip for Kylie Tink. You've got this big printing bill. Maybe you can go out and print copies of your letter, of the signatures of all of you Teals supporting the Labor government on this. Maybe you could spend some printing money on that and pass it around your electorate. They are frauds and they are phonies and they need to be got rid of. Nearly 1 million people have come into this country under the Albanese government. 1 million people, that's right. We used to complain when there were, 100,000 so-and-so. In 1 month alone, 125,000 migrants coming into this country. Where are the hospitals? Where are the homes? Where are the roads? Where's the public transport we were talking about? No, Adam Bandt, not everybody can fly around in a private jet like you can. 1 million extra bodies on the streets of our major cities, costing you jobs, costing the economy. This is the new Labor policy. Flood it with people who they hope will then vote for them. It's the same stuff going on as in America, James.
Well, this is really, really sinister here. I mean, we talk about a housing crisis, we talk about inflation, we talk about household incomes going backwards, and this is because Labor has decided to pursue a big Australia policy. You remember they had a big summit on this last year where they stacked the whole thing full of big Australia pro-open borders type of people. And what have we got? Well, we've got, sticky inflation. We've got housing prices that are through the roof. Young people can't get a place because they're competing with 4.5 people for every new dwelling that's built in this country. So we're never going to build out of it. And they want to go, essentially, this is a big sop to the property developers who all want to go and steamroll suburbs to put up Soviet-style high-rises across Sydney and Melbourne and cities across the country to house all of these new people. But, there's just simply not the room. And in the meantime, our GDP per person is going backwards. We are in a per capita recession. Household incomes 100%. Are going backwards, and it's all being hidden by the sugar hit of Labor's big Australian migration policy.
And the ideology, Rita, the idiocy and the incompetence of Labor never ceases to amaze me. They've mucked up the detainee visas again, so 149 people. They got that all wrong. Rita?
Well, yes, it's nothing to worry about. We're only talking about murderers, rapists, child abusers. I mean, it's the worst of the worst, and it's becoming abundantly clear if you go through this, is that they either were so inept that they botched the case, or they just deliberately wanted that, because they really gave the High Court no option when they go in there and say, well, there is no plan, that there is no chance of this particular criminal getting out of detention. So it put the High Court in a very... they really did not have too many options. So at that point, you would think they would at least come up with a plan B. No, they had to get bullied into that by Peter Dutton. And now they have that emergency legislation in place, but they're not using it.
Because they're incompetent. Let's have a look at Labor blaming everyone other than themselves, the classic Labor ploy. Have a look.
This issue was a technical issue.
A technical legal issue in an Australian law that had been passed by the Parliament in 2013.
This is a technical issue that goes back to 2013.
This is an issue that had been on the books for more than a decade, since 2013, throughout, indeed, the former government's time.
This is a technical issue, guys. We've got a technical issue. Not our fault, nothing to do with us. At least we got some common sense from Peter Dutton. Have a listen.
It didn't occur under a coalition government. This happened under a Labor government. Let's be very clear about it. The red herring that they've thrown out there is not factually correct. And Minister Giles and others shouldn't be in their jobs. How the Prime Minister can keep Minister Giles in his job when he's released 149 hardcore criminals into the community on the wrong visas is beyond the average Australian's comprehension.
I mean, number one, we know that being tough on borders is not Labor's DNA. But the other thing, too, remember this about Adam Giles. When the Australian government solicitor was coming in to meet with his office to give advice about this NZYQ case that has set off this disaster, he was off campaigning for The Voice, which tells you where their priorities are.
And he has spoken about the reason he entered politics was because of the advocacy of the Tampa incident. So that's his ideology. It's no secret where he stands, and it should come as no surprise that this area is a mess. Both those ministers are not fit for those ministries. They're important ministries. And if
but then
Albanese...
again, who in that Labor coalition is, in my opinion, incompetence, the lot of them. Speaking very quickly about The Voice, the South Australia's Voice, we've talked about that on this program. It will disrupt, or the threat is that it could prevent or disrupt South Australia's nuclear industry, which we desperately need. So great work there, South Australia. But let's go now to Keith Pitt, the MP from Coalition MP from Queensland. Keith, great to see you. Got the flag there and you got the Phantom comics in the background. Good man. This is what we like to see on a Sunday morning. Keith, wanted to ask you a bit about this nature positive plan that I talked about last week. And this is arguably the most dangerous piece of legislation that is being snuck through. It's the secrecy that Labor are up to, exactly what they did with The Voice, trying to sneak it through Parliament. Can you tell us from your point of view what is happening with this nature positive plan and the threat it poses basically to anyone who wants to turn over a bit of soil in their backyard or their paddock or wherever else?
Well, good morning, outsiders. Great to be with you. And yes, Shane Wright is actually does a lot of the cartoons for the Phantom. So, and he's a local, which is wonderful.
Excellent, good man.
The nature positive plan is Australian negative. That is the problem. And a lot of this has been developed, would you believe, in late 2022, and it has been kept almost top secret. There's some 37 recommendations, and if we look at just a couple of them, one is that effectively cultural heritage will be everything. There'll be a national body that's already been formed, to be honest, in terms of where they get their advice. And this is a state issue. It should be left with the states to look after. Another layer of regulation over the top, just to deal with cultural issues, is another nail in the coffin, particularly for those big projects in the resources sector that we need to keep our economy ticking over. If you look at one of the other elements in terms of the 37, we're now going to have what's effectively the Green Police. So you can imagine who'll be applying for that. You'll have green anarchists with a badge, able to stop projects, enforce things, provide fines, do all sorts of horrible bits and pieces. And you can still delay it through the courts. Well, unless you're in Victoria and you're a wind and solar farm, where they're changing the rules and those impacts won't be there and they're going to bypass it. But just for those types of projects, because, you know, not all projects are equal.
But we need to ask the Labor Party and Tanya Plibersek, who's pushing this, where are all these so-called endangered species? Is there a map showing us where they all are? Is there a list of endangered species? Because when I waded through the lengthy Department of Energy and Environment blurb about it, they're very vague on the details, exactly how many species are at risk. They actually boast, Keith, that there will be more and more species. They're finding more and more endangered species every day, and they haven't given any indication of actually where these endangered species are. So I've drawn up a map, Keith. I don't know if this is a valid one or not, but here's where I think, there it is, all of Australia. All of Australia will come under the remit of this new endangered species, unacceptable impacts, critical habitats, etc. Do you think I'm being unfair to Labor?
Not at all. I think if you look at the map, that's what will apply. But there are some exceptions, and those exceptions are where you want to put big wind and solar plants because, well, they're exempt. Clark's Creek, for example, in Queensland, 3,500 hectares of koala habitat, but apparently they're not impacted there. They're only impacted when you're close to the cities or somewhere where the green anarchists can show up. And in Queensland, they don't have to meet all of the existing development rules that everyone else has to. I'm told the reef regs, for example, don't apply. It's just ludicrous. Then you come back to, as I said earlier, what's happening in Victoria, where they're now going to exempt the processing and planning proposals that they would apply to every other project so that it doesn't slow them down, so that those who are impacted don't have the normal routes to go and apply to courts. They've got to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court. So not all projects are equal.
Rita.
Well, is this legislation the most dangerous legislation we have seen, according to some? Is this going to pass the upper house? Where does it stand right now? Is this going to be law by June?
Oh, well, clearly they'll have the Greens' support, and the Greens will probably bash out something that's even worse. And then you've got the other Greens in terms of Pocock and the other allegedly independent senators who I'm sure will support it, and they'll bash out something which is even worse.
The Teals?
We're waiting to see what the coalition... The Teals, we're waiting to see what the coalition position is. But you just can't keep putting regulation over regulation for the big industries that provide jobs and drive our economy and expect them to stay. And they'll keep leaving because there are other places in the world they can invest their money.
James.
Keith, a huge fight has been brewing this week about the cost of the renewable energy transition. We reported in the Daily Telegraph this week that Chris Bowen was out by at least $100 billion on his numbers for the transition to net zero. We've seen things like the Snowy 2.0 project blow out by, I think, around $12 or $13 billion thus far. And now we have CSIRO defending its Gen Cost report because they have been accused of miscalculating how much this renewable transition is going to cost. Are the wheels starting to come off this idea that this is actually going to be, an economically viable idea, thing to do, and that renewables are, as Chris Bowen keeps telling us ad nauseum, the cheapest form of energy?
Well, Chris Bowen is the Maxwell Smart of the federal politics. He's missed it by that much. It's over $100 billion. But this is the proposition. So, I mean, forget the economists at 10 paces and everything else. What Chris Bowen is trying to say to the Australian people is you can have two cars in your garage. You've got to borrow money for both. One will only work when the weather conditions are right. The other one will work all the time. The one that needs the weather-dependent conditions, you'll have to build all new roads for all over the place. But you don't worry about the cost of those. That doesn't count. And somehow that will be cheaper. Well, as long as my backside points to the ground, you can't build two generating systems and have it be cheaper than one.
So, Keith, you mentioned James mentioned the amount that they were out, 100 billion errors. But we've also seen this week Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, I'll be talking about it later in the program, but out there in Western Sydney spruiking a transport. They gave 20 million of taxpayers' dollars to a transportation company, Christine Holgate, funnily enough. She's popped up again. To do EVs. Now, that's $335,000 per truck that the Australian taxpayer is subsidising. I mean, we can't keep on subsidising this madness. Where is the money coming from, Keith?
Well, it's coming from each and every one of you and every single taxpayer that's watching this program. And I can make anything work if someone else pays for it. It just doesn't matter. You don't need to be an economist to work that out. And these are the challenges. So it's not technically viable right now. It's not economically viable, and that's why the big providers are simply not doing it. And I know on the resources sector they've done all of these assessments and they can't make it work. Now, does technology advance in the future? Well, who knows? But until it does, no one's going to make these changes on the grounds of engineering and economics. And then the environmental impacts down the track. What do you do with all of these batteries, which are incredibly dangerous? They burn very, very hot when there's a fire. There'll be significant challenges because currently I'm not aware of anywhere that can recycle them. And then what about the value of those assets? If you're a poor Australian taxpayer that buys a new car, which is battery driven, and you go to trade it in and it's worthless, well, I don't think too many people will be happy about that, and particularly their bank.
And Keith, just quickly before you go, what did you make of the Queensland elections yesterday? And wipe the smile off Giggles' face this morning, was it?
Well, Premier Giggles Miles has got the spanking he deserved, but it's not going to change the current government. In October, the people of Queensland have to make that decision. It's a long way to go yet, and we've certainly seen some changes in the mayoral race, and those who are rock-solid Labor, Jenny Hill and others up in Townsville. I get on fine with Jenny. Looks like they're in trouble, and it comes down to two things, youth crime and housing, and the Labor government has failed miserably on both.
Keith Pitt, great to chat to you as always. Thanks for coming on Outsiders this morning. Great to see you. Thanks, mate. And I love that Phantom comic there in the background. After the break, it's Rita's reality check. And we've got some very special guests, including Michael Schellenberger in a tick.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan, Diversity, Dean, James, Equity, Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi. I'm all about inclusion. Coming up, I don't know why that's funny. In just a few minutes, we'll be speaking with a fearless investigative reporter who is changing policy, saving lives, the great Michael Schellenberger, whose latest expose has laid bare the disturbing practices and lack of evidence behind so-called gender-affirming care. But first, let's check in on the leader of the free world. Look at that confident gait. He is as fit as a fiddle in body and mind. 4 more years, no problems there. America's enemies must be terrified of this man's strength and mental faculties. You just know China, Russia, Iran are watching on, quivering in fear.
Mr. President, do you agree with Chuck Schumer that Netanyahu should go?
Look, let's not judge too quickly. Let's see if we get an answer there to the journalist's question about whether the president supports his colleague Democrat Chuck Schumer's call for regime change in Israel. Regime change, not in Gaza, Israel. This clip should inspire supreme confidence in the Commander-in-Chief. Oh, dear God. If that man is fit to be president, then I'm a bluefin tuna. That is a man who should be enjoying his golden years, having ice cream and pudding in a retirement facility, not the White House. Or could we combine the two?
At White House Senior Living, our residents feel right at home. Our vibrant facility offers delightful activities and outings, round-the-clock professional care, and exquisite house-made meals.
Well, I've been eating everything that's put in front of me. I've been eating all Italian food, basically.
And ice cream.
And ice cream, chocolate chip ice cream.
White House Senior Living, where residents feel like presidents.
Goodness
so good.
me, beautiful bit of satire there. But it's not just the Yanks bring us political satire. We have brilliant writers and cartoonists poking fun at the absurdities of the Australian political system. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back and enjoy the latest episode of Pauline Hanson's Please Explain. This week, we explore the beauty of DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion.
Alrighty, time to hire our chief surgeon. 2 candidates. Steve, top of his class, 25 years experience, miraculously never lost a life. Or Opal, legally blind with an essential tremor, never worked a day in her life, but has wanted to be a doctor ever since she was a little boy. What school did she go to? Puppy school. She identifies as a moodle. Okay, I think we should go with Steve. you doing? Hiring on merit? Not on my watch, you're not. Bunch of white men hiring white men again? You swore an oath, remember? Or was your commitment to diversity just a lie? What's that? All right, we'll hire Opal. Good. Nice job, Adam. This diversity, inclusion and equity weapon sure is powerful. Yeah, well, if you're serious about eradicating racism, you're going to need the big guns. Oh, there's just so much racism around here. Look over there. Why is this woolly selling Australian flags? Take them symbols of oppression down now. Of course. I apologise. Why didn't you consult with First Nations peoples before putting this park bench here? Oh, I didn't think that. Tear it down and apologise. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. There's so much racism around here. What's that, a Zoom call without a welcome to country? Hey, Adam, do you reckon I could have a go at pointing the gun at people's heads?
Now, let's see if Albo does any better wielding the weapon that is DEI. Perhaps he will hold anti-Israeli activists accountable or point out that a multi-millionaire soccer star allegedly berating a working-class copper with racially charged language should be frowned upon, or will he meet the consequences of his own stupid actions?
All right, stamping out racism wherever I see it. Is that a from the river to the sea poster? Ha! That's calling for genocide. That's racist, right? What? No. Albo, that's activism. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, of course. I was just being stupid. Oh, but look over there. There's Australia's favourite lesbian female soccer player for the Matildas, Sam Kerr. And what's she doing? Being racist to a police officer? You stupid white. Ah, Sam, you need to do better. Nope, that's not racist. Move on. What? But didn't you hear what she said? Yes, but it's impossible to be racist against white people, Albo. Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, that's not contradictory at all. But oh no, there's Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, doing blackface again! Albo, no, he's one of us. Just ignore it. Now, hang on, now I'm confused. That doesn't make any logical sense. Logic is racist, Albo. It's a filthy white construct designed to maintain the hierarchical power imbalance that we're trying to destroy. Oh, I get it. This is a completely incomprehensible weapon that's not actually used to eradicate racism, but rather just to use against our political enemies. Now you're getting it? Haha! All right, let's go destroy the fabric of society.
Not so fast. You think I'm scared of this? I've had this thing fired at me more than anyone. Go on, take your best shot. Make my day.
Huh? What's going on? No one's ever stood up against this thing before. What do we do? Fire! Press the button, Albo. What are you waiting for? Destroy her! Ah! Okay! Albo, don't! All right, let's open this stupid white it up. Scalpel. Oh no, the consequences of my actions, no!
Oh, so good. If you want to support the hilarious team behind those cartoons, then get yourself a bottle of Senate vodka, or perhaps you prefer Senate gin. It'll make watching Question Time far more enjoyable.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rita. And well done to One Nation and James Ashby and the other team, and all those in the team behind those cartoons. A huge win for common sense this week as the UK bans puberty blockers for children under 18. Maybe we should be thinking about doing the same thing here, but elsewhere in the West, there are still growing instances of gender ideology causing concern. Now, a great friend of this show, you'll remember him, he's been on here many times, Michael Schellenberger. He's the same journalist who exposed much of the climate hoax, who's brought us the Twitter files, and has now exposed the previously secret meetings of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. That's WPATH, or WPATH, if you like. And what they reveal about the West's approach to gender healthcare is absolutely shocking. Joining us now is Michael Schellenberger. Michael, always great to see you. Hope you're well over there in the States. The work you've done on this is groundbreaking. It's gone all around the world this week. Tell us about it and how you came to expose these files, and more importantly, what is in there that is so disturbing?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on. It's It's a dark topic. This is the organization. It's called WPATH, and it's the so-called Transgender Medical Association that all of the major medical associations in the world rely on. And what their internal files show is that the people in this organization know that they are not getting so-called informed consent from kids and parents to life-altering medical procedures that will result in sterilization, the loss of sexual function, and perhaps even worse, cancer and death. We see kids as young as 10, 14, 13-year-olds with developmental delays discussed as potential patients to receive puberty blockers, as well as cross-sex hormones and surgeries. We see people with schizophrenia who are homeless discussed as candidates for surgery. We see people talking about giving drugs and surgeries to people with developmental delays, but also with dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. So what we're seeing is a really shocking case of medical mistreatment. I mean, it's definitely one of the worst in history. It might be the worst, I mean, of the last couple hundred years, honestly. When you look at sterilization, lobotomies, these are irreversible decisions being performed on a lot of times young people or vulnerable adults that have highly treatable psychiatric disorders like anxiety or autism spectrum, or they're just gay or lesbian kids or adults. But then you also have people with more serious mental illness. In both cases, these are totally inappropriate medical mistreatments. It's quite shocking to read because they have been claiming that this is based on science and good medicine, but they themselves acknowledge when you read these files, and there's also a video I should point out, they themselves acknowledge that they really don't know what they're doing. They're sort of making it up as they go along and sort of giving each other advice in a sort of chat room environment. It's really awful stuff to read, and it really couldn't come to an end any sooner.
Let's have a quick look. Here we go.
I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm always like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, right? Yeah, they're like, no, I just found this, wonderful partner, and now we're kids, and da-da-da.
So they're discussing the dog ain't going to do it for you. The fact that a lot of these young, confused kids having these treatments end up with all sorts of lifelong consequences, sexual function issues, infertility. And in that instance, they're talking about patients who want to have children and they find they can't. And there was such a callousness to how casually that was discussed, Michael.
Yeah, and you really see the way that ideology is driving this. So in that same conversation, there's a point where they say, yeah, we really don't know how to explain to 14-year-olds that they won't be able to have kids in the future. They may lose sexual function. So gosh, that's something we need to figure out how to do. Well, no, the answer is stop performing these gruesome medical experiments on children. 14-year-olds can't possibly understand that they may want to have kids, in their 20s and 30s. So that's the right response, is to go, yeah, we don't know how to explain it to kids. That means that they're too young to be doing these procedures on. And yet they were sort of plowing ahead being like, oh yeah, it's this big mystery. We don't know how to deal with this problem. These are not responsible people. These are dogmatists that are in the grip of an ideology, of a pseudoscientific ideology. They think that there's multiple sexes and that you can change somebody's biological sex through medicine. That's witchcraft. That's not modern science or medicine.
James.
And Michael, I mean, this is one of those things, you mentioned other previous things we look back historically as monstrosities in the medical community. And this is what happens when ideology gets confused with science. But, some of the other things that were involved in these files are really disturbing. I mean, we're talking about very powerful hormones here, and we're talking about, potential even links to things like cancers and so on, to young people that would never have gotten them because they have apparently been treated with very strong hormones, which doctors don't even fully understand the effects and how these powerful things that, get released in our bodies during a very critical stage of our life work, and the things that they do to our reproductive and other systems.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, there's already a response by an advocate of this so-called gender medicine where they claim that, oh, really, there's no evidence that testosterone would have contributed to these tumors on a female's liver that's described in the files. Well, in fact, we went and looked at it, and in fact, there are a large number of patient testimonies about testosterone causing liver tumors. We also see discussions of death from the use of these really radical drugs. And in fact, it turned out in that particular case of the liver cancer that the females' livers are more susceptible to the threat of testosterone because the livers of women are different. You know, the differences.
Who'd have guessed?
Go figure.
The differences between men and women are not merely superficial. It's all the way down to our core physical cellular organs, our genetics. And so you're dealing with really a pseudoscientific cult. I think that's the only accurate way to describe it. That's performing what is the equivalent of witchcraft on children. And look, our societies tolerate a lot of strange beliefs. People are welcome to have strange beliefs. They must not be allowed to perform these dangerous and irreversible and often deadly experiments on the bodies of children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults. They've got to come to an end.
And Michael, just tell us again how WPATH, WPATH, or whatever they call themselves. The problem to me is not so much that they are so clearly, struggling in the dark, but other people cite them as the experts. So you have other doctors, the medicines, teachers, psychiatrists, all sorts of people then going, well, hang on, here are the experts, and the experts are saying this. But what you've done, Michael Schellenberger, is you've exposed that the experts ain't experts when it comes to lots of the detail. Is that the problem?
Yeah, it really is. And you mentioned at the beginning of this that the British National Health Service last week announced that it would be stopping all puberty blockers in its hospitals. The Times of London, which is a center-left newspaper, came out and said that the ban on puberty blockers should be even bigger. It should go across the entire country because they're worried that they'll still be prescribed in private clinics. Also the Times of London called this quack medicine. So you finally now see some responsible journalism. But I would also note, just in answer to your question, the Times of London pointed to WPATH as the group that was effectively allowed to whitewash and provide cover for the British medical authorities and other groups. Certainly, I mentioned the American Medical Association, the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all of them pointing to the WPATH as though it were some scientific or reliable medical body. It's not. It's basically, it's a completely fringe pseudoscientific cult organization that has presented itself and used very slick marketing to portray itself as an organization committed to patient health and the best available science, but it's not. It's absolute quackery, and really shame on all the institutions that fell for this. They can't distance themselves from WPATH faster. They need to distance themselves from it. And then there's going to need to be a reckoning, because a lot of kids, thousands of children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults around the Western world were damaged by WPATH. I think it's going to take a lot of lawsuits in the United States. A bunch of states have already banned this unethical medical practices, but we need to see national action. We've called on President Biden to put an end to this. I think we're going to see very quickly an unraveling of the entire gender pseudoscience and medical mistreatment epidemic that we've had over the last few years. I think it will happen very quickly now.
Well, it's happening quickly in the UK. Scandinavia's reviewed these practices. You mentioned the bans in parts of North America, in America, but in Australia, we are blindly following this gender-affirming model. There is no reviews of these practices or any harms they may be causing. And some of the quackery or junk science that we keep hearing about when people defend gender-affirming care is, well, if we don't do this, then we're going to have a mass number of suicides. The confused kids who are getting this treatment would be at risk of self-harm if we don't give them hormone puberty blockers or double mastectomies. What's your response to that? Is there any actual evidence that backs up those claims about the threats of suicide?
Well, not only is there no evidence that supports those claims, there never was any evidence that supports those claims, and yet those were claims that were repeated by these prestigious medical organizations for years. What's more, we now know there was a study done in the last couple of years that showed that males that attempted sex change operations, and of course it's a misnomer since you cannot change your sex, that those individuals had a higher rate of suicide than those who did not go through with the surgeries. I think it's important for people to be reminded of something. If you, as a child or adolescent or adult, tell a therapist or a doctor that you're suicidal, they have a moral and ethical and I believe legal obligation to hospitalize you and require that you get psychiatric help. We don't let people threaten suicide. If we think they're at risk of suicide, then we actually require hospitalization because we don't allow people to be a threat to themselves or others. So the idea that there were people demanding medical treatments and that if they didn't get them, they would commit suicide. The fact that this was allowed to go on for years is really quite shocking. It's just one of the many shocking elements of this entire story, which we're still getting to the bottom of. It all rests on fundamentally a pseudoscientific idea that there's more than two sexes and that you can change your sex. From there, you get all sorts of really grotesque, psychologically manipulative, and in some cases, I just have to say, psychopathological behaviors and I think motivations behind the people that are both promoting these fake treatments, these harmful experiments, and the people performing them. I don't know how you go and do this to children and vulnerable adults while having much of a conscience or much of a reasoning brain. I just think there's something really wrong with the people that have been doing this, and I think they need to be held to account for their behavior.
And Michael Schellenberger, that's exactly what you're doing, holding them to account, and a great job you do, as you always do. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders again, Michael, and we'll speak again soon. So remember that WPATH? How many Australian organisations cite the work of WPATH in their push for this sort of transgender ideology? Alex Antic has been pushing in the Australian Parliament. The Libs need to get behind this. Alex Antic has been pushing in Parliament to get this up and running here, to have an inquiry into this in Australia. It must happen. Get behind Alex, go to Libs, get onto this issue. After the break, Net Zaney, lots more coming up on Outsiders. You're watching Outsiders, and thank you so much for watching us every Sunday morning. We certainly do appreciate you being here and us being with you. Keith Pitt said that Shane Wright was the man behind the Phantom comics, but it's Shane Foley, of course, Shane Foley. So there you go. Keith is corrected, stands corrected, and Shane, we love your work. Now, Net Zaney, the zany, mad, crazy, wacko, weirdo world of net zero policies that are crippling this country. Chris Bowen, right at the start of them. James, we learn, what a surprise, that wind farms kill birds. Yes, they do indeed. Chris Bowen's out there pushing more and more wind farms. But here we have on Twitter, tell us about it.
Well, just in the United States, discovery that more than 880,000 bats and up to 679,000 birds every year are killed that they know about from these wonderful wind farms which are out there saving the planet. And of course, many of these birds are majestic, wonderful creatures.
Yep.
Eagles, things like that. And, this is the whole lefty thing. We're gonna destroy the planet in order to save it. And we've seen the same thing happen here in Australia, the exposure of the environmental impact statements of these wind farms and solar farms in Queensland and elsewhere, where what are they going to do? Well, they've got a whole plan to manage all the injured koalas and injured birds and everything else. And that is kill them because, who cares about the wildlife? We're saving the planet. This, by the way, is going to set up a huge fight between Tanya Plibersek and Chris Bowen, mark my words.
Where are all the groups who would normally be taking a stand for animal welfare? They should be far more vocal. You do not hear from them. And it again suggests that they've been captured by the global warming alarmists. I mean, if you actually care about animal welfare, wherever your position is on climate change, you should be speaking up. Or do they think the planet's going to end in 10 years and all the animals are going to die anyway? I mean, if you've got that sort of catastrophist thinking, then no wonder we're in this mess.
And that footage we showed is heartbreaking. A magnificent eagle there, dead, obviously, broken in pieces by one of these wind farms. We're sticking these things up all around Australia. Australians, quite rightly, are absolutely appalled by this, as well as the sea life out in the oceans that's been killed by these things. Call yourself an environmentalist, you are a fraud. All of you, seriously, if you're supporting this stuff, you are frauds. And the teals up there right at the top with the greens, absolute fakes and phonies.
It's the beauty of the Australian countryside. You don't even have to look overseas. If you go driving in the country, you'll see it now scarred by these developments. They're ugly, and I think because they're outside the major cities. A lot of people don't know it's happening, but when you see it and you see that beautiful countryside
being destroyed. Nice work, Crispo and Plibisek.
But
I hope the voters remember it. Yep.
But you know what it comes down to? There was a fascinating piece in The Australian this weekend about Jenny George, who was, Labor, ex-female president of the ACTU. She said that she, for years and years and years, had concerns about the renewables transition. And for her, the concern was jobs and what's it going to do to all the people, all of her old members who were going to lose their jobs because these jobs didn't exist. And it's the same thing as with the environment and the birds. It was explained to her the only thing that matters is the target and getting to zero. And they don't care.
They don't care about the ramifications
along the way.
Ideology, idiocy, and incompetency. The three I's of Labor, the
Bingo.
Greens, and the Teals. And how's this for a laugh from England? I mean, I wish it were funny. Net zero ambulances. Yes, your ambulance in the UK. The NHS are looking at, we must have electric vehicles for ambulances. The humour, the black humour that revolves around that concept. They're going to introduce it. That's as crazy as it gets, but they'll be doing it here as well. The craziness never ends. Oh, and by the way, Labor, your uni super green funds are plunging in value. Those super funds that invested in all this kind of renewable batteries, etc., etc. 28% it's dived, the Uni Super Fund. 124 billion Uni Super Fund has been hit with a massive plunge from its green fund. So all you investors out there who voted for Teals and Greens, it's going to bite you, it's going to hit your portfolios, this electric madness. Anyway, after the break, show you lots more with Deborah Conway coming up. Can't wait. In a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. This week, the Western world, to its eternal shame, turned on Israel yet again, unequivocally, with the risk of betraying every Jew on the planet to the murderous barbarians who seek Israel's destruction. I say the Western world, but let me be more specific. The dominant political left of the Western world, the ruling left-wing political parties of America and Australia, the Democrats of President Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, and Chuck Schumer, and the Australian Labor Party of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong, along with the ruling left-wing cultural elites of Hollywood and our very own ABC, have chosen to support those who are persecuting Jews. Let me spell this out, as I've done for many years now, accurately, as it turns out. If you support the modern left, you are no supporter of Israel. If you support the modern left, you are in danger of supporting those who intimidate and harass Jews across the world and those who call for the annihilation of the Jewish people. That is the only conclusion that I can draw from the events of the past 7 days. The week began badly on Monday, Australian time, at the Oscars, with the disgusting speech by Jonathan Glazer, a British film director. Glazer's film is about a Nazi officer, Rudolf Höss, who lives a life of comfort inside the bubble of his opulent home, while outside, behind the walls, the gas chambers of Auschwitz are doing their filthy, murderous work, killing Jews. Seemingly unaware of the irony, Glazer, who seems to live in an opulent Hollywood bubble, which also chooses in the main to ignore the ongoing horrors of Hamas's murderous, evil, barbaric hostage-taking campaign of October 7th, and the equally sadistic and barbarous rape, dismemberment and murder of Jews, chose the platform of the Oscars to, quote, refute his Jewishness. How the butchers of Hamas, let alone the ghosts of Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Eichmann, must have chortled with laughter in response to Glazer's grotesque remarks. A group of survivors of the Holocaust wrote an open letter to Glazer, including the following sentences, and I'm quoting here. I am 94 years old and the only member of 105 souls in my family to survive the Holocaust. I miraculously survived nearly 3 years in the hell of Auschwitz and 1 year in the hell of Buchenwald. I watched in anguish on Sunday night, that was the Oscars, when I heard you use the platform of the Oscars ceremony to equate Hamas's maniacal brutality against innocent Israelis with Israel's difficult but necessary self-defense in the face of Hamas's ongoing barbarity. I'm quoting now, "You made a Holocaust movie and won an Oscar, and you are Jewish. Good for you," says the writer. "But it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for the 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children who were murdered solely because of their Jewish identity. And it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for those of us who personally saw the world stand silent as our mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were murdered. We actually had nowhere to go, no possible place of refuge. No country would accept us, even though world leaders knew full well that thousands of Jews were being murdered every day. There was no Jewish nation to which we could flee." He goes on, "You should be ashamed of yourself for using Auschwitz to criticize Israel." Glazer was, of course, applauded by the lovies, the left-wing cultural elites of Hollywood. And I reiterate, this is the leftist mindset, the modern left, making Holocaust movies and winning awards for showing empathy for the dead Jews of the past, but at the same time, ignoring similar horrors being perpetrated against Jews in the present. We've seen the same vile hypocrisy, there's no other word for it, in the way the modern feminist movement has similarly virtually completely ignored the most disgusting assault on femininity in modern history, the rapes of living and dead Jewish women on October 7th. Here is author Batya Sagan explaining how this sick mindset works.
It goes beyond that to the core of leftist ideology, which is built on a belief system that has erased the difference between right and wrong. Now, this belief system is one you will know well if you have been to a university in the last 40 years, or an American newsroom, or on TikTok, or in a meeting with any cultural institution in America, or any progressive organization, including any liberal Jewish organization, or if you're on the board of a museum, or even in a writer's room in Hollywood. This woke worldview absolutely dominates the left, which means it dominates the cultural and intellectual output of the United States these days, rendering all people, for example, who they see as people of color, powerless and oppressed, and thus virtuous, and all white people powerful oppressors who are inherently evil and compromised. His act was her fault, and her suffering does not release her from the burden of her status as oppressor, even in death. That is why leftist feminists cannot side with raped Israeli women. To do so is to betray everything they believe. They truly see the Israeli women as deserving of everything that happened to them and having brought it on themselves. Like the conservatives of yore who blamed rape on the miniskirt worn by the victim, the left today blames the fact that Israel has more power than Hamas for everything Hamas does. They simply cannot think their way out of seeing Hamas as virtuous, because to do so would be to admit that their entire worldview is not only wrong, but is disgusting.
I share her frustration, the modern left. The reason that calls for a ceasefire are so obscene, and why any letting up in the war on Hamas is morally putrid, is that the leaders of Hamas have repeatedly made it crystal clear that they intend to carry out those barbaric murders, rapes, beheadings until every Jewish woman, man, and child is dead. So let me reiterate. If your left-leaning ideological way of thinking has you seeing any moral equivalence between the evils of Hamas and the self-defense actions of the Israeli Defense Force, you are simply incapable of telling right from wrong. It may be time to sit down and take a long, hard look at your ideology. Calls for a ceasefire ramped up during the week from all the usual left-wing entities, including protests in Brussels. Here's another brave woman, the Belgian member of the new Flemish party in the European Parliament, Asita Kanko, explaining why a ceasefire must and cannot take place.
Calling just for a ceasefire is to a certain degree saying to Hamas, well, you can try it again tomorrow. Dear colleagues, I'm strongly convinced that there will be no prospect for peace, security, stability, and prosperity for Gaza, as well as for Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation, as long as Hamas and other terrorist groups will play any role in the Gaza Strip. I support the continuation of humanitarian aid entering Gaza by road, air, and sea, and stress that it must reach those civilians in need, not Hamas, not UNRWA, The disbursement of aid has to be organized in such a way that chaotic scenes and Hamas taking over aid convoys and redirecting aid to its own fighters are prevented. AU funds, which in the past were provided to the UNRWA, should in the future be given to the UN Development Programme, UN Refugee Agency, and the World Food Programme. Stop fueling Hamas. For the sake of the Palestinian people, for the sake of the Jewish state, for the sake of global peace and security, Hamas must end.
What a wonderful woman. The difference with our own political leaders here is breathtaking. And here's another brave woman, the released hostage Judith Raanan, who explained how even the nurses at the Gazan hospital were cheering when Hamas brought her and other abducted Jewish women on October 7th into Gaza.
All the nurses were standing there and going like this. They were also happy that they came back with prey, with Israeli Jewish prey. Although I told them I'm an American, but Jewish prey, like we've captured our prey, and everybody is very happy about this.
The nurses were cheering?
Yeah.
Which brings us to what else happened this week thanks to our left-wing political elites. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly disgustingly waded into the filthy swamp of moral relativity by offering $1 million to help the survivors of October 7th, but then in the same breath virtually offering exactly the same amount to investigate and assist Palestinian women who'd supposedly been raped by Israelis. Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, Michael Cotter-Wunsch, rightly slammed the Canadian foreign minister on X for perpetuating a false moral equivalence. But things only got worse during the week. On Thursday in the US, the Democrat Senate Majority Leader, the left-wing Chuck Schumer, who is Jewish, in a speech cleared by and then praised by the Biden White House, disgracefully called for the removal of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying he is an obstacle to peace who had lost his way and was leading a government of far-right extremists. The utter stupidity of those comments ignore the fact that there are more parliamentary elections in Israel every few years than there are nincompoops in the Albanese cabinet. The last election was less than 18 months ago, and more importantly, this is a unity government made up of all the major political parties, including opposition leader Benny Gantz, so new elections would not change anything at all. But worse, America has no right whatsoever to interfere, as they know, in another democracy and allies' electoral timetable. And it is clear that this is being driven entirely by left-wing ideological hatred of Netanyahu and pandering to the Arab vote in knife-edge states like Michigan. Biden is prioritizing left-wing political self-interest over the security of Israel. Disgusting. But even that was not enough sheer idiocy for the ideologues of the left. Here in Australia, we learnt the very next day that the appalling Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and her colleagues in the Labor Party have disgustingly decided to start resending Australian tax dollars, your money and the money of hard-working Jewish Australians, back to UNRWA, the utterly discredited United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is being investigated for the alleged links between some of its employees, which we've detailed here on the show, and the terrorist outfit Hamas. I've been warning about UNRWA for years on this show and in The Spectator Australia. Here's what Andrew Wallace, the Liberal National Member for Fisher on the Sunshine Coast, who is also Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, had to say about Penny Wong's grotesque decision. Quote, "Today, the Albanese Labor government have made the inexplicable decision to reinstate $6 million of Australian taxpayers' money to the embattled United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, despite investigations continuing into allegations of corruption and complicity with the massacre by Hamas of 1,200 innocent Israelis on October 7th last year. At least a dozen UNRWA employees are alleged to have been involved in the brutal attacks on October 7th, with reports that staff provided support through logistics, weapons procurement, and direct participation in the kidnap and massacre of innocent Israeli citizens by Hamas terrorists. Direct participation, he says. Andrew goes on. These were teachers, social workers, administrators, and warehouse workers paid by taxpayers through UNRWA contributions. Supporters of terror, funded in part by the tax dollars of hard-working Australians. He goes on, Australians are right to expect the federal government to withhold any further funding from UNRWA, and they are rightly concerned that the federal government has breached its responsibility to uphold the norms of fundamental human decency. Well said. The decision to resume funding to UNRWA, which, I may remind you, was agreed to and urged by the Teals, the hands that signed this paper, without any independent findings, is an appalling affront to the people of Israel and to Jewish Australians who continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas terrorists and their allies. Well said, Andrew Wallace. The Sunshine Coast can be proud of you. And may I add, many Australians and Australian Jews are rightly absolutely furious at this decision. And let nobody, as I said, forget the role of the Teals in signing this letter. This letter. The Teals, the hands that signed the paper, clearly no friend of Israel, in my opinion, urging Penny Wong to recommence sending your money to UNRWA. There is now a petition on change.org called The Labor Government in Australia Needs to Stop Funding to UNRWA. So go on to change.org and sign that. Finally, on a slightly lighter note, it would appear that some people who traditionally did view themselves as of the left are waking up to how idiotic and wrong it is to side against Israel. Here's Bill Maher, once a paragon of the left, but in danger, I suspect, of becoming a pariah if he keeps on coming out with proper comments like this.
For all the progressives and academics who refer to Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing, please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. Please, somebody stop us before we enlighten again. And since one can find all these concepts in today's Israel and virtually nowhere else in the Middle East, if anything, the world would be a better place if it had more Israels. Of course, this message falls on deaf ears to the current crop who reduce everything to being only victims or victimizers, so Israel is lumped in as the toxic fruit of the victimizing West. The irony being that all marginalized people live better today because of Western ideals, not in spite of them.
What a shame we don't have anybody like that on the ABC. Instead, this week, we learnt that the taxpayer-funded ABC has disgraced itself over Israel by cancelling an iconic Australian singer, songwriter and author for holding views that the ABC said were controversial. In other words, because as a Jew, she has publicly supported the continued existence of Israel. She has since, I'm glad to say, been invited back. But as I say, if you still don't get it, let me spell it out yet again. The modern left in all its manifestations, Labor, Greens, Teals, are no friends of the Jews. In my opinion, if you choose to associate with the modern left, which includes the US Democrats in Canada, Trudeau's Liberals in Australia, labelled Greens, Teals, you risk aligning yourself with a pernicious political ideology that is fundamentally opposed to Jewish values and has no qualms about facilitating the destruction of the Jewish state. As I said, the ABC this week has once again shown anti-Israel bias by disinviting a Jewish music artist from one of its radio programs. Apparently, her pro-Israel views made her too controversial. But that's just one of many cancellations that Deborah Conway has faced since the war in Israel began. Deborah joins us now. Deborah, great to see you again. Thanks for coming on Outsiders this morning. Tell us about your cancelling. Tell us about your cancelling, how it came about and why you decided you were not going to sit silent.
So I wrote a book last year, and off the back of that book, we constructed a theatre show
And we've been performing that theatre show around the country, and we're just about to do some more regional shows in Melbourne. And the promoter of a couple of these shows organised a publicist to get some publicity, and he booked an interview with the ABC, David Astor's evening program. And that was scheduled for a few days later. And on the morning of the said interview, I was contacted by the publicist and told that the producer had just arrived back from overseas and had suddenly caught up with the controversy that I was surrounded by, and decided I was too hot, too controversial to have on their light evening entertainment show. So I was summarily dismissed. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not there to talk about the Middle East. I have no interest in talking about politics. I just want people to come to my show, which is pretty good. But they were not to be dissuaded. So I thought about it for a while. I contacted someone that I thought might have some sway. He gave it a go. There was no shifting within the ABC at that point. So I decided I just can't take this lying down. It wasn't about me at that point. It was about the idea that a taxpayer-funded institution that we all look to in some way to present us all Australians within their airwaves and TV shows or whatever. I know that can be, maybe hopeful, but I remain optimistic a little bit. But it was not to be. So I decided we should go to the press, and I contacted Cameron Stewart from the Australian newspaper, who I'd had something to do with before, and he wrote an article about it.
Rita.
Well, you've spoken out, and you've possibly have the profile and the history as an artist to deal with this cancellation, because this is not an isolated event. But how is the climate of self-censorship, intimidation in the artistic community? How many others are remaining silent because they're too scared to lose bookings, to lose interviews?
Well, from my observation, I think there's probably many more people that have something to say about it, but in fact are intimidated because of the pylons that they see other people getting. I mean, there's been just this outrageous hate that's been circulating online, but it also breaks out into the real world. If you think it just stays online, it doesn't. People's shops have been graffitied. Anna Schwartz's art gallery's been graffitied. People are abused in the street. Mezuzahs have been torn off doors. There's been, people have gone down to Caulfield to protest about a fire in a burger joint that was, it was not the fault of any Jews. There's been a lot of real world examples. I know someone who was arrested trying to get into a vote at council at the Melbourne Town Hall, but people who were, trying to beat him up, they were left alone. So there's not just intimidation online and by words and by threats to either remove you from a performing program. There's also some kind of physical kind of threat as well. So it's the whole thing is a really murky soup of ugliness, and if you don't have to step into it, then you probably prefer to stay away. But
James,
I found it too upsetting to stay silent, so that's why I had to speak up.
And I mean, this is, you mentioned a bunch of examples. We've also seen that at the University of Sydney now, there have been reports that, you do not want to show your Jewishness or you will feel under physical threat, things of this nature. But are you concerned now that there's a movement in society, particularly among sort of the cultural gatekeepers, that support for Israel is now suddenly an idea that is now akin to being racist or being an apartheid supporter, that it is now something that is, to borrow a phrase, unfortunately beyond the pale, and that this is really tilting in very, anti-Semitic and not just anti-Zionist or, we're not fans of what Israel is doing sort of direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the word Zionist has been completely co-opted to mean something that it actually doesn't mean. It's simply the declaration of a desire for Jewish people to have self-determination within their own state. It's now being equated with Nazism, with apartheid, with white supremacy, with colonialist, with oppressor. There's all kinds of layers that are going in on top of this. And it's as much as I can see, it's propaganda, and it's being bought whole by a certain cohort of people who do have enormous influence in thinking organs, you know, our media, our education, our schools, you know, politics.
Deborah, I've got to jump in. We've got to go, but I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up and giving so many young Jews in particular the courage to go, yes, people like Deborah are speaking up. I've had the real privilege of hearing you and your husband Willie perform and sing absolutely beautiful music the two of you make together. So I urge everyone to go along, see your show. Songs from the Book of Life, absolute magic. And thank you, Deborah. We all remember you fondly as the pop star, but you are so much more. And thank you for your bravery and speaking up for so many Jewish people in Australia. Deborah Conway, thanks so much. And make sure you go along and see her and Willie's great stuff. After the break, James Donkeyvote and Jay Bhattacharya here on Outsiders in a Tick.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders. I'm James Morrow, here as always with Rowan Dean and Rita Panahy. And now is the part of the program where we document America's descent into full banana republic status. And a reminder that if the fall of Rome 2.0 is your thing, tune in every Friday night at 8 p.m. for all the gory details on
the U.S. Report.
So let's begin, shall we? In Georgia, where a local judge has just made the case for burning the whole joint down better than General Sherman ever could have. Now, just to bring everyone up to speed, Georgia is where Donald Trump is being prosecuted for allegedly interfering in the state's calling of the 2020 election results. This is ironic, of course, because Georgia is home to Stacey Abrams, who became a nationwide cause celeb for refusing to accept that she lost her own race to become that state's governor. But never mind, she's black, a woman, and a Democrat to boot, so never mind. Trump, on the other hand, well, which may explain why, despite extensive evidence of prosecutorial misconduct by Fani Willis, the district attorney handling the case against Trump, including an improper relationship or affair involving sex and reportedly a whole lot of cash and trips and, among other things, changing hands between the two of them, Nathan Wade, the lead prosecutor in the case, well, that would have in any other instance seen the nakedly, so to speak, political charges against Trump thrown out. However, despite that, on Friday, the judge looking into the matter said, well, look, that all looks bad, but you know, it's probably more important to get Trump. And that's why Judge Scott McAfee cut a middle path, according to the New York Times, calling the whole thing a massive error in judgment and saying that despite the, quote, appearance of impropriety, unquote, as well as the, quote, odor of mendacity, unquote, big words there, the prosecution could continue against Trump so long as Nathan Wade stepped down, which he duly did. Meanwhile, Fani Willis cast herself as the victim, praising her former, at least we assume, former lover for his professionalism in stepping down and hitting back at the unjustified attacks on her. Honestly, which brings us to the next chapter in our story. Robert Hur, who was the special prosecutor in the classified documents case against Joe Biden. Now, let's recall the facts of this. Robert Hur found that Biden had been keeping classified documents all over the joint, in his garage, in his basement, around the house, and in various offices of his for years. Likely, I believe, because he needed access to these documents to have his team write self-justifying books and biographies later about disasters such as his botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. House Committee Chair Jim Jordan summed up the findings of Robert Hur's report the other day succinctly.
Mr. Hur produced a 345-page report, but in the end, it boils down to a few key facts. Joe Biden kept classified information. Joe Biden failed to properly secure classified information. And Joe Biden shared classified information with people he wasn't supposed to. Joe Biden broke the law. But because he's a forgetful old man who would appear sympathetic to a jury, Mr. Hur chose not to bring charges.
But despite Robert Hur saying that although he did not exonerate Biden, he also said he would not go forward with recommending charges because, again, as you just heard, Biden presented as an elderly man with a poor memory. In a world where the rule of law meant something, this would mean that Biden was either too compromised or too incompetent to continue as president. Instead, though, it means that Robert Hur, like Judge McAfee in Georgia, split the difference, saying, well, this is all bad, but hey, he's still the presumptive Democratic nominee. We can't go proceeding and prosecuting against him. Which brings us again to the last leg of the stool here. Now, what you're watching is footage from a knife and gunfight between two passengers on the New York City subway a couple of days ago that ended with one combatant being stabbed and another shot. Now, this man here, Dajuan Robinson, allegedly went berserk on another man, Uneche Obuad, on the A train Thursday night because, according to law enforcement sources, Robinson thought that Abuad was a recent migrant and he didn't like that. In the ensuing mayhem, Abuad stabbed Robinson in the back, and indeed Robinson came off worse in the whole encounter, with the New York Post reporting that the fight, quote, left the 36-year-old deranged man shot 4 times, stabbed twice, and hospitalized in critical condition. Uneche Obuad, it should be noted, was released without charge for self-defense. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because that's great, except that not everyone who performs self-defense gets treated so fairly in New York. Let's not forget the very different treatment handed out to Daniel Penny, the 24-year-old U.S. Marine who is now facing years and years, possibly 15 years in prison, because he performed a fatal chokehold on a deranged homeless man who was threatening other passengers. Now, despite being praised by those who were on the subway for his action, the case is going ahead with prosecutors seeking more than a decade against him. But you see, the problem is, among other things, Penny is or was a Marine and a hero during doing a job that the National Guard has been called in to do in New York because the cops couldn't, instead of being just a random brawler like those other guys. So, you see, big fish or little guy, it seems like justice in America is all about who you are and whether your prosecution helps or hurts the narrative.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. Well, the United Nations is trying to turn the World Health Organization into a worldwide health autocracy. And if they're successful the next time there is a pandemic, which they get to declare, the response could be centrally controlled by the United Nations. COVID on steroids. Joining us now to discuss this much more is Professor Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University. Jay, great to see you as always. First up, congratulations. We didn't get around to congratulating you last year when you won your Samizdat Award, along with our very own Miranda Devine, for your bravery in speaking up during COVID against lockdowns, using your knowledge of epidemiology to warn against some of the political measures being taken. You were awarded that award. Congratulations, heartily deserved. What do you make? Should we be scared of what the World Health Organization are now threatening to do, Jay?
I think that the World Health Organization, the way they frame it, they say, oh, they're not violating anybody's sovereignty. But the infrastructure they set up, and as you say, they can then declare a pandemic. Basically, they will have authority over that. It gives them tremendous power to induce countries to enact policies that they may not have a ton of say over. The way that they'll do it is they'll say, look, you have to. They'll impose guidelines or strong recommendations, and then the public health bureaucracies inside the countries will fall in line, just as they did during this pandemic. It'll strengthen that link and relationship with a single source of truth, in a way, emanating from above. I think it's incredibly dangerous, Rowan, and I don't think that it's wise, especially for poor countries, to allow this to happen.
Rita?
Well, I was going to ask about long COVID, if I could, because there's been a lot of reporting just in the last 48 hours, including from the likes of The Guardian, saying long COVID doesn't exist. So where are we with this? Because that was used as an excuse for some of the COVID era policies that we saw. There was this fear factor of long COVID.
I mean, I think this is one of those things where there's some truth and some not truth to it. So I think there are people who legitimately suffer consequences, medical consequences from viral illnesses. I think what the Guardian report suggested is that the rate at which that happens after COVID infection is very similar to other viral infections like the flu, which means it's a real problem. It's just not 10, 20, 30% of the population, which some long COVID advocates have said. I mean, that kind of exaggeration actually, I think, harms the patients who really are harmed, who really are suffering. And I think it's one of those things where more research is needed, compassion for the people who are suffering, but don't exaggerate it. And certainly don't tell people that you have to lock down, close society down in order to protect against something that it's not possible really to. I mean, how do you stop COVID from spreading? We don't have the technology to do so. A lot of the problem then is just exaggeration on the part of activists, where rather it should be compassion on the part of patients that are still actually suffering.
James.
But those activists, they were so present during the pandemic, and they used the pandemic essentially to wage war on normal life in our societies. Are you concerned when you hear people go around, and these are big health authorities and big political authorities, say, oh, and when the next pandemic comes, and don't worry, it will, that people are some people are almost too eager for this sort of thing to return?
Absolutely. I think if one thing we've learned during this pandemic is that there are people and companies and political parties that benefit, that know how to benefit from these kinds of crises. And so they have incentives to prepare and for those kinds of crises again. I think the right kinds of reforms we need, one is this pandemic was very likely caused by the pandemic preparedness industry. The dangerous lab experiments funded and pushed by the WHO. I mean, we need to address that. Second, we need to make sure that the kinds of extensive violations of civil liberties that the lockdowns represented, violations of basic human dignity and rights, never happen again, that these are not powers that are inside the orbit of public health. And the censorship campaign embraced at scale. I mean, I know you all face the same problem in Australia, outsiders in particular. That is something that should never be in the toolkit of public health. And declaring an emergency is not an excuse to violate the basic democratic civil rights. We have to reestablish that as a basic fundamental principle of our societies before any pandemic ever happens again.
Now, Jay, you first appeared on this show right early on in 2020, and you warned against the dangers of lockdowns. You were vilified. You signed the Great Barrington Declaration. You were one of the authors of that, vilified again. Now, where are we 4 years later? You have been completely vindicated in everything you stood for and spoke out about and warned about. Where are we now? We've got sort of universities like Harvard who are kind of saying, oh, we don't need vaccine mandates any longer. What's the mood in America? Where do we sit? And globally, like countries like Sweden, for example, which you always said would do better because they weren't locking down, that seems to have been the case. Where are we now in terms of your vindication, Dr. Bhattacharya?
Well, as far as the actual facts, it's Sweden won the pandemic. All-cause excess deaths are lower in Sweden than I think basically every country on Earth, certainly compared to the rest of Europe. And they've avoided so much of the catastrophic collateral harms. Their children have suffered no learning loss, according to the studies that have been done. So what you have is a pandemic policy that focused on identifying who's vulnerable and protecting them to the best they can. They made mistakes too, but that strategy worked, whereas the lockdown strategy failed. I think a lot of public health is in denial over that, Rowan. I think they think that that maybe we just got lucky in thinking that the kind of pandemic strategy we follow for the last century worked in Sweden. I don't know, but they're in denial that they got it wrong. They can't admit they can't say that they got it right. I mean, everyone can see the catastrophic harm of the lockdowns everywhere they look in the United States, for instance. But on the other hand, they can't admit that they got it wrong, and so we're stuck in a middle ground where a lot of the people that made the decisions, they're giving themselves awards, they're taking power through the WHO.
Absolutely. They're giving themselves awards and taking more power through the WHO. We've got to leave it there. Dr. Bhattacharya, thanks so much for coming on Outside. It's always great to see you. Full vindication there, and congratulations on your Samizdat Award. Much, much deserved. Thanks, Dr. J. Bhattacharya. Coming up, Canberra Clown Show. Lots to laugh at in a tick. Roll up, step right this way, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Canberra Clown Show, the greatest show on earth. And this week, our travelling circus headed to Sydney's western suburbs for a knockout comedy performance by everybody's favourite pair of climate clowns, Al Bozo and his sidekick, Bobo Bowen, in their favourite clown car, the EV.
Hey everyone, it's a great day in Eastern Creek today. We've got 60 new electric trucks for Team Global Express. Charged by these Australian-made chargers, solar panels on the roof, batteries. It's great for emissions. It's great for drivers. It's cheaper for the company. It's better for our environment. It's a good day for Western Sydney, a good day for Team Global Express, and a good day for Australia.
Just not a great day, in my opinion, for people who want their parcels delivered not in clown cars, but with the efficiency and reliability traditionally provided by the good old-fashioned petrol engine. Apparently, some of Bobo Bowen's EV trucks only go about 100k before needing to be recharged for 90 minutes, and even less if it's a hot or cold day and the heating or the air conditioning is on. But why have one clown in your car when you can make it a double act?
This is a great day. This is a game changer. 1/3 of the heavy vehicles operating out of this very big facility in Western Sydney will be all electric. This transformation is a great example of my government working with the private sector, with the business community to assist the economy, to assist them, but also to assist our objective of heading towards net zero.
Glad you kept repeating that word assist, Al Bozo. Yes, we the taxpayers have certainly assisted your performance by giving, wait for it, drum roll, over $20 million of taxpayers' money to assist the purchase of these clown cars. Sorry, my mistake, these trucks. 60 trucks. That's around $335,000 we have paid to assist each and every one of these trucks. No wonder Christine Holgate, yes, that's her on the far right there, the former postie chick who got shafted by ScoMo and now has a new gig. No wonder Christine was jumping for joy. $335,000 per truck, you little beauty. But hey, what's a lazy $20 million when, as the Daily Telegraph reports, there are claims Energy Minister Chris Bowen has lowballed the cost of transitioning the country's power grid to net zero by as much as $100 billion. What's that to a Labor poly? That's $100 billion of your money extra that's going to be splurged in this net zero comedy show. Of course, at the same time as wasting all our money on hopelessly inefficient renewables, Bobo Bowen has been out there disparaging the one energy source with zero emissions that we actually do have a potential abundant supply of. Here he was on Q&A last year trashing nuclear.
I can't think of a worse fit for Australia than nuclear energy. It's extraordinarily expensive. We don't have a nuclear industry in Australia, so we'd be starting from scratch.
What a joker. Until recently, we didn't have a renewables industry either. We started that from scratch. We don't have a green hydrogen industry either. We're supposedly starting that from scratch. Everything this bozo is doing is starting from scratch. Even the kids spotted that sleight of hand.
The cost of nuclear is clearly highly contentious, and you know what the best way to find out the cost of nuclear energy is? It's to lift the nuclear energy ban, because at that point, you can actually see nuclear reactors, what they will cost, because at this stage, no company is able to propose for nuclear reactors to be built in this country.
Yeah, that was 17-year-old Will Shackle, who was on here on Outsiders, winning over the tough Q&A crowd and stealing the show from Bobo with a dose of common sense. But Will's not alone. Over at the Centre for Independent Studies, the talented Miss Zoe Hilton ripped into Bobo Bowen's shocky pea and thimble clown act and tore it apart.
Energy Minister Chris Bowen loves going on and on about how expensive nuclear energy is and how cheap renewables are. And the media loves repeating this message.
It's extraordinarily expensive.
But where did Minister Bowen get this from? It all comes from the CSIRO's annual Gen Cost report. The CSIRO decided to exclude large-scale nuclear from their analysis and only include small modular reactors, or SMRs. Now this might seem a bit odd, given that large-scale nuclear is a proven technology used in more than 30 countries worldwide, while SMR technology is still under development. In fact, the CSIRO based their SMR cost estimate on a single cancelled project and erroneously included financing costs, which they did not include for any other technology.
Well spotted, Zoe. Great work. So which clowns decided not to include the most basic nuclear energy of them all in their Australian energy costing report? Our chief scientific body, no less. Here's Paul Graham, chief energy clown, chief energy economist at the CSIRO, which is itself an almost perfect anagram for circus, explaining why large-scale nuclear energy, which is relied on and used in over 30 countries, as Zoe said, around the world, was not included in the CSIRO's energy costings report. What a farce. Roll up to the CSIRO circus.
So we had some face-to-face workshops in 2018 with industry groups, and there weren't any nuclear experts at those workshops because it just wasn't, I don't think it was just on their radar at the time. Large-scale nuclear isn't the right size for Australia.
The CSIRO's decision to exclude large-scale nuclear was based on a workshop they ran 6 years ago in which no nuclear experts were present. Because why consult an actual expert when you can rely on the opinions of renewables, coal and gas investors?
Remember, we taxpayers fund the CSIRO circus to the tune of billions of dollars. As Zoe points out, they hardly fill one with confidence.
In order to maybe do a large-scale nuclear, there's a few things we'll have to work through. This question of whether it is appropriate size for Australia, and then if you thought it was, how would you come up with an Australianised number? A couple of things that we'd have to think through, so we'll do some more thinking on that.
Heaven help us, as Tony Abbott tweeted in response to Zoe's excellent video, quote, "The recent emission of large-scale nuclear from the CSIRO's energy costings report not only undermines our nation's ability to affordably reduce our emissions, but further justifies the public's declining trust in government institutions." Well said, Tony. You can, of course, find Zoe's full video on the Centre for Independent Studies website. Just go to cis.org.au, and why not sign up for membership while you're there? They do an amazing job at the CIS. Oh, and did I forget to mention, at the same time as Bobo and Al Bozo are running around spending squillions on batteries and electric vehicles and solar panels and all that schmozzles, yep, these are the clowns determining the energy future, the prosperity and the standard of living of this country. I say, sacked a lot of them. Oh, and by the way, if the clowns at the CSIRO had bothered to do any research, they would have discovered, as the excellent Joanna Nova points out on her Jo Nova blog, the French built a large-scale nuclear reactor in just 7 years, way back in 1976. Meanwhile, even the ABC admits that Bowen's baby's lithium-ion batteries caused more than 1,000 fires in Australia alone in the last year. And this week, a massive fire was caused at a car salvage yard in Essex, with 8 vehicles destroyed and the culprit believed to be an EV. What would Deep Purple have to say about that?
Sky.
Lefty Lunacy Canada, James. What did the police there come up with?
Well, yeah, you know, that's a pretty wild place up in Canada. They want you to put your car keys out. Have a look at this here from the Toronto Police Chief.
To prevent the possibility of being attacked in your home, leave your fobs at your front door. Because they're breaking into your home to steal your car. They don't want anything else. A lot of them that they're arresting have guns on them, and they're not toy guns, they're real guns. They're loaded.
So there you have it. If you live in Toronto, just leave your car keys by the front door. In fact, probably don't even bother locking your front door. In fact, why not just leave the whole place unlocked? Put your jewelry out on the front porch, maybe your TV out, because you don't want to get hurt. All the thieves want is your car and your stuff and whatever else. This is where we are.
What happens if you've got the fishbowl with all the keys in it? How do they know which one to steal?
But you're mocking Canada, and
we are mocking
we should mock Canada. But we're not much better, because during the week there were reports from Alice Springs, same thing, that people are leaving their car keys prominently by the front door because they don't want to have a machete at their necks asking for it. So though we mock them, I don't think we're much better.
There was a solution like, you know, catching the criminals and locking them up.
Wash your mouth out with soap. James, also in Canada, by the way, they've decided that you can't be a woman. You have to be a person with a vagina. So there you go.
Okay,
anyway, that's Canada for you. Pierre Poilievre, he's a legend. We want to see more of him next week. But Rita, tell us about the Palestine drag show. I'm sure Hamas would love to toddle along to this one.
So is this happening in Gaza? Or
Sadly, no. This is a drag show for Palestine starring drag artist Daddy Satan. So, yes. But again, it's almost impossible to parody this. This is just so absurd that when you hear about these, are you thinking, is this a troll? Are they serious? But apparently, yes, they are. And we don't need to point out what would happen to any of these acts if they were to walk down the streets in
any Middle Eastern, other
Gaza,
than Israel.
or just about any Middle Eastern country other than Israel.
Other than Israel. You say it's almost parody or comedy, satire. The FTSE 100, which is like the ASX in Britain, the Financial Times Stock Exchange, are now calling for trans women to be included in female chief executives. So they want more female chief executives, but they want those female chief executives to be trans women, i.e. blokes, as we were discussing earlier. So the feminists, this is the end of feminism. The left are destroying, like they destroy everything, they're also destroying feminism, true feminism. Anyway, that's it for Outsiders. We'll be back next Sunday at 9 a.m. Can't wait to see you then. In the meantime, Rita Panahi, 11 o'clock, Monday to Thursday night. Do not miss it. I certainly don't. And, of course, James and the US Report, 8 p.m. on Friday. We'll see you next week. Bye.